Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of UK Edu Stories with myself, Bookie Yusuf, and my co-host and friend, Mark Anderson. This week's episode is looking at a very interesting, I think, topical theme on diversity. And we're very much looking forward to hearing the experiences and thoughts and reflections from our three guests, Morgan, Nick, and Alana, but they'll introduce themselves more later on during the episode. This week also coincides with the much needed half-term break, because you can see I'm more alert, even happier, higher energy levels, because we needed a much needed break right now. But before we actually go into the episode, Mark, how's your half-term break been?
Well, you know me, no rest for the wicked, Bookie. But my favourite bit was the favourite bit for my two boys, actually. Yesterday we went to a local beach and we did a bit of stone skimming on the water, and it was just the best. We got soaked right through, but we were enriched beyond belief. It was just a great time to spend some time with my children and step away from the computer. And I think, as I tweeted, more memories, less Fortnite.
Yes, I totally agree. Yeah, that sounds like a lovely memory-making moment, particularly, and a great skill. I have never been able to skim stones. Usually it just goes plop right into the water, and that's about as far as it goes. So it's great that you're doing that.
It really was great fun. Professionally, great week. I did the Check It Out show, a new show with Al Kingsley, exploring new edtech on Tuesday evening. I had Learn Live UE on Monday, which was great. Planning for some upcoming conferences. I chaired a webinar for Guess, which is like Bet, but in Dubai. I chaired a panel there on Tuesday, as well. So busy with work as always. But my favourite of the week definitely has been that moment, taking time to connect with my children. How about yourself, Bookie? I saw something about some bike riding.
Yes. So in amongst my priority was sleeping, eating and chilling out, and the most active thing I did this week was actually cargo bike riding. So I shared on Twitter and LinkedIn my experiences about it. I just thought, yeah, it's going to be really cool. But after I looked up what a cargo bike is, so if those of you are not familiar, where you see it looks like a little box either at the front, all the bikes we use had boxes at the front or at the back, that is a cargo bike, because you can actually transport heavy things around. It's damn hard. So the video someone took of me basically meant that I crashed, after listening to instructions from one of the instructors. I thought, right, he said, if you feel like you're not going to, you can tipple over or something like that, just keep adjusting your handlebars. And I just crashed into the curb, within about 10 seconds. It's really hard because of the weight, but it's a great experience. Yeah, good learning experience though. But I've really disconnected this week. Just took a couple of days out for work-related things and just reconnected with friends and family. So it's been a great week. Thank you.
Super duper great to hear. And clearly you've had a bit of an audience for your bike ride. We've got Toria.
Toria.
Claire doing this. Welcome viewers this evening. As always, if you've got any questions or comments, please send those through either on YouTube or Periscope, wherever you're watching us. Whatever tool you're using to join us this evening, please send your questions and comments through. We're always very happy to hear from you, so long as they're all positive, obviously.
Of course.
But the show isn't about us, as we know. So should we bring our three guests into the studio?
Yes, please, Mark. Thank you.
Brilliant stuff. So we have Morgan joining us from Abu Dhabi. We've got Nick and Lana joining us from London. Welcome to the show, buddy. How are you?
Hello. Yeah,
great.
Really good. Thank
Doing
you.
well.
Lovely. Fantastic.
Would you mind introducing yourself? If we work our way around from the top and then go left to right. So Morgan first, if you could just introduce yourself and share a bit about who you are, your experience, what it is you do, please.
My name is Morgan Whitfield. I'm actually a Canadian teacher who worked in the UK, and I worked in Birmingham for quite a while and then moved to the UAE thinking that I'd be there for a few months, but I'm now approaching about a decade teaching in the United Arab Emirates in Abu Dhabi, and I love it here, and always teaching British curriculum schools, so really enjoying it.
That's fantastic.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for joining us, Morgan. Alana.
Hi, I'm Alana Gate. I'm a head teacher of Vita Pax Prep, which is in 3 to 11 school in North London, co-founder of BMed, and quite enjoying life at the moment.
Great stuff. Thank you for joining us, Alana. And Nick.
Hello, so I'm Nick Bentley and I'm a lead practitioner and drama and nurture group teacher. I teach at a school in East London and I'm a member of the LGBT Ed steering group as well.
Fantastic.
Great. Thank you for joining us, all of you. Thank you.
Okay, so, oh, sorry, I thought you passed. Pause. Okay, apologies. So what I'll do is I'm going to pose the first question, but I'd like to hear the response from all of our guests. Diversity means a number of different things to different people. What does it mean? What does the word diversity mean to you? So if I start with Morgan first, then Nick, then Alana, please.
I think defining diversity, that's a tricky one to begin with. I think that we can automatically do a list of different identities, whether it is neurodiversity, whether we're looking at students of determination, different sexual orientations, ethnicity, language, age, race, and genders. There's all these different ways to define diversity, but I think the big thing is after you kind of say all of these things that are on that list, all these different identities that people use to define themselves. The big thing is diversity in schools means giving all of those different identities platforms. So not just saying that they exist, but actually giving them voice to actually exist.
Okay, thank you so much, Morgan. Thank you. Nick, what does the word diversity mean to you? I know it's a biggie, but I think it's really important just to get it from, like, as I say, we all take it to mean different things. It'd be good to hear from your perspective as to what it actually means to you in the work that you do.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. It's a huge question, isn't it, diversity? But I think I kind of agree. Diversity is about valuing every single person and valuing, every single person for who they are, not irrespective of who they are, but because of who they are, and making sure that those individual kind of differences that make the person who they are, make sure that they are celebrated and respected. I think that's incredibly important. And for me, that's kind of the essence of what diversity really means.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. And last but not least, Alana, what are your thoughts about what diversity means to you?
Well, diversity, as I think Nick and Morgan have said, is all about respecting the individual, accepting them for who they are, and allowing them the space and the voice to put forward their individual perspectives or their group perspectives on different aspects and ideas. So it's about everybody making room at the table so that we can encompass all the people and all the different forms of thought that there are, as well as all the different forms of protected characteristics that each person has.
Yeah.
But I would say, less about diversity, but probably more about inclusion, which is where the amplification of voice happens in itself.
Okay, so can you unpick that a little bit? Sorry, before I go to Mark, when you say about inclusion, what do you mean by that, Alana?
Well, when they say diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance, inclusion is more about others around, making the space and giving the opportunity for people's voices to be heard. Because you can have a forum or a table that is diverse in terms of the characteristics, but the people, some people at the table their voice doesn't hold as much power as the others. Whereas within inclusion, there is consideration of all the different voices, all the different ideas, and we build on that in order for us to widen all of our perspectives so that we all get a contribution from that. Whereas when we say diversity, especially nowadays, when we say diversity, it tends to be who is around the table as opposed to what voice are we allowing them to have.
Thank you so much. I think it's a very powerful way to end that definition, the fact that it's not just about having a diverse representation, but what you actually allow to happen with regards to that. So I think that's a very powerful introduction. Thank you all so very much. I'm going to hand over to Mark for the next question.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. That's really, really important. We've had some feedback already with Toria just jumping in and sort of reaffirming what Morgan was saying there at the beginning. Thank you for that, Toria. My next question, and just to mix things up a little bit, I'll start by asking you, Alana, if you could respond first, then Nick, then Morgan, please. The next question is, what prompted you to become involved with a diversity focus?
Oh gosh, I think it was my own personal experience. So having been through the UK teaching system, I found it very difficult in order to progress. And I found that I came across a ceiling. So originally I was a part of Women Ed, and that prompted me to look at myself or the female perspective in education. And then from that stemmed BayMed, when we started looking at, well, what's the impact of ethnicity in education? Because I don't want anyone else to face the similar challenges and feel discouraged in the way that I did. Because when I was going through different issues, I felt that it was only me. And therefore, I'm the only one experiencing this. And I didn't have many people that I could turn to who would be able to identify the struggles that I went through as a Black Caribbean female in education. So I wanted to provide a forum where we can have lots of people and have their ideas championed so that their voices are amplified and they can be heard. So it's a very personal part of the journey for me.
Yeah, it can be really personal as well, can't it?
Yeah. And it starts off personal, and then eventually once you widen the network and more people come on board, you start thinking of lots of other ideas, and you start building yourself in with lots of other networks as well. And that's what I really enjoy about the work now. It is refreshing and energizing, especially at a time when it seems that there's a lot that's pulling the energy out of us. we can go into our network and find that joy and that energy from others and from us being a collective.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for sharing that, Alana. Thank you ever so much. And to you, Nick, same question, please.
Thank you. I think that I think I'm going to start off by saying Twitter. I think Twitter is obviously an incredible platform for educators sharing. So I started off by kind of joining Twitter and accessing it. And then I realized that there were all of these fantastic networks that provided opportunities for people to have those discussions. And I saw that there was a event that was hosted by Hannah Wilson, Diversity Education. And I've attended all of the different conferences that they put on, and I just found them absolutely fantastic. I found the sense of support and solidarity that you get from kind of coming together and connecting with people who might have similarities, they might also have differences with you, but actually just being able to speak is incredibly powerful, and listen to different people with their own experiences. And I know at the first Diverse Educators event that I attended with my colleagues, Yamina and Hannah and Salsan, we were talking about lots of different protected characteristics, and the LGBT ed kind of launch happened at that event. And I was listening to the speakers, to Hannah and Daniel, and they were incredibly powerful, I think, commenting on issues that I felt like I could connect to as an openly gay teacher, and thinking about those experiences. And I started to think, well, I want to get involved with this. I want to see what I can bring, what I can learn, but also what I can take from this. I was also inspired by the people that were speaking from Women Ed and BayMed and Disability Ed, the kind of the real powerful personal experiences. They were really, really important for me. And I think in developing my own understanding and trying to think about what I need to do as well with my own privileges that I have, as a white cisgender man, but then also thinking about my own experiences as part of the LGBTQ plus community and what I can do as a teacher too. So those events were really, really formative for me, and I think using that as an opportunity to connect and share with different people was hugely important within my own school practice there, where I tried to apply what I was learning and what I was finding out.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And I mean, from both of your responses there, it does go to highlight the importance of having these networks around too, because it can be quite isolating when you don't have those things. That's one of the real powers of things such as Edu Twitter, bringing people together and allowing you to sort of connect and share like in that sort of way. Moving to yourself, Morgan, what sort of brought you to have a sort of focus around diversity? Your mic's off, Morgan, sorry.
Actually, a really similar experience. I think that like we've all kind of said how the personal kind of is the political, and I think that that's been my journey as well. I kind of grew up as one of those kids who fell in love with Model United Nations, and I wanted to make a difference in the world. And I remember that all being kind of high and lofty until I saw things happen in my classrooms that were extremely unjust. I remember kind of coming of age in Canada, where there was a really, really famous case of Mark Hall. You probably wouldn't be familiar with him in the UK, but Mark Hall was a boy who was 16 who actually ended up suing his school board for the right to take his boyfriend to prom. And it absolutely kind of turned education on its head for an entire year. The fact that it really kind of spotlighted the fact that there was so much injustice. There was so much kind of challenge and unnecessary pain that students were going through every single day because of the education system just in itself was institutionally quite oppressive. And I think that once we started seeing that example, all of a sudden we kind of use that as a lens to look at how students of color were experiencing their education, and so on and so forth. I think that was kind of really eye-opening when I started to see that happening to my friends. And then I think in university, I started to really become involved in networks, feminist groups, and that's kind of where I pursued my education. I later traveled kind of all over the world, and it's really interesting to see these same problems kind of echoed in classrooms, whether you're in India, whether you're in Mexico, whether you're in the UAE. Yeah.
That's really interesting that you've got that sort of global perspective there, Morgan. Thank you very much for sharing that. Bookie, over to you for the next question.
Yes, thank you. So what are some of the misconceptions around diversity within a school context? And you can talk from your own personal experiences or maybe what you've actually seen or been made aware of. And I will start with Nick, if I may first. Nick, then Alana, and then Morgan.
I think with diversity, sometimes people think that it's something that you can quickly tick off and something that is a kind of a tokenistic thing. And I know that obviously it's something that needs to be placed, I believe, at the heart of a school and what a school does in terms of actually making sure that every single student and every single young person at that school gets the right experience from that education. And also so that every single member of staff gets that too, because it's really important that everyone feels respected and valued. Because really, that's what a school is, or a college or a place of learning. It's making sure that every single individual gets the very best experience from it. And if the whole experience isn't geared up to recognizing the individual students, the individual teachers, the individual educators, or whoever, because there are lots of different members of staff, of course, in schools, if they aren't at the heart of everything that happens, then that school isn't doing the right job. So I don't think diversity should be seen as an additional, an extra. Rather, it should be very much at the heart of everything that is done. And it can be an amazing thing to celebrate then, and not something to be afraid of or concerned about, but actually to champion the individual people within the school.
Fantastic response. I love that you said about moving away from it being a tick box. And I think that's what a lot of people feel it is, to a place, to something that allows everybody, including staff. So thank you for raising that particular point as well. Feeling celebrated and getting the best experience that they possibly can from within this context. So Alana.
I think for me, it's everything that Nick said, but also invisibility. So I think when schools try to say, "Oh, that doesn't happen here," that we're not racist, we're not prejudiced, discrimination doesn't happen, we appreciate everyone, and they think more about the words that they have within their policies as opposed to the lived experiences of the students and staff in their school. So the power of what they're saying and the power of what they're doing are at juxtaposition. So they're two very different things and two very different experiences. Unless schools and the people within schools are willing to open themselves up to be vulnerable and to be in a learning position, and instead they maintain this idea of invisibility. Well, I'm colorblind. I treat everyone in my classroom the same. I have no regard for anyone's color. I have no regards for anyone's sexuality. I have no regard for anyone's disability. The longer that persists, the more that you're detracting from the inclusivity that diversity can bring in order to the school and into our society. And I think that really takes away from all of the work that's going in for us to be appreciative of each other's culture, there's differences, and for us to really be an inclusive society.
Okay, thank you, Alana. Before I go on to Morgan, I have another question, if I may. So where you have some people who genuinely, who mean out of the best intention, say, I don't see colour, I don't see anyone's sexuality, etc. what would be the most appropriate thing to make them realize that maybe that isn't the best approach to have, but they need to actually recognize things from a different perspective and understand about the fact that the phrases they use, even though it may be well-meaning, actually detracts from what they're trying to achieve?
Well, I suppose in terms of color blindness, I'd say, why do you not want to see what fundamentally has helped to shape me into the person I am? So why don't you see the value in the color of my skin? Why does it have to be invisible to you instead of be something that is wholesome and appreciated by you? So getting them within the sphere of understanding that, yes, it's nice that you're saying you don't see color. However, the rest of society does. There are intrinsic institutional racism that will happen across schools and across all institutions. And there are injustices that will happen. And we can't work to fix injustice if we make it invisible, because what you're saying is not important. And if it's not important to you and you're my friend, my colleague, my peer, then however is it going to change? Because you won't be part of that critical mass to make change happen.
Okay, thank you, Alana, and thank you. Apologies for putting you on this spot, but I just wanted to unpick that a little bit. Thank you. And over to you, Morgan.
Your microphone's off. Sorry, Morgan.
Sorry, I'm going to keep making that mistake. No, I could not agree with Alana and Nick more. I think the common misconception I think that so many schools have is that superficial celebrations cover it, that International Day or kind of doing a nice acknowledgement of Black History Month is enough. And like those are very, very nice, and they're kind of really nice entry points. But that superficial celebration kind of ignores the harder work of changing a white heteronormative environment. Schools should have kind of entrenched positions that allow diversity to be fostered all the time. And so when we just have these kind of like standalone events or moments where we talk about diversity, it kind of keeps them in this enclave where it's kind of not touched the rest of the year. So it's really important, I think, to have something that is a little bit more of a difference maker in an institution. So when you start to go to the heart of changing policies, that's when you can make a really, really big difference. And I don't think that schools recognize that and go that step further to start making true change.
Okay, thank you so much. Very powerful responses, and obviously, as you say, the heart of it is change and the hard work that is required to make, I suppose, systemic change really in that regard. But I'll hand over to Mark for the next question.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you so much. And this sort of leads on really nicely from the comments that were being made from all three of you in response to the previous question. Thank you so much for that. Could you share, please, and I'll go Morgan, Nick, and then Alana. Could you share, please, any ways that you've actually gone around, because Nick used the word tokenistic, and another word around it sort of always is buzzwords and all these sort of things. But are there any ways in which you've actually tried to ensure that diversity is not tokenistic or buzzwordy or within your context or your experience at all, please? So, Morgan first, please.
Yeah, sorry. So what was that? You wanted to know about?
Yeah, about the ways in which you've tried to ensure that diversity is not just a buzzword.
Yeah, I think that there's ways that you have to make diversity really visible, because I think a lot of the times people, they're really entrenched in their own privilege and they don't see that there is a lack of diversity. So you kind of have to just open up their eyes. So one of the quick ways that you can do this is audits. You can do things like have your students and your teachers do a textbook audit where they have to look at, well, who's writing the textbooks that we actually have at the school? Like, where, like, are they men? Are they women? Where are they from? Where are these voices coming from that kind of shape so much of our everyday life? You could do a display audit. I love display audits. I walked into the maths department at one of my old schools, and I remember just giving them a talking to, because every single historical math moment that they had on their walls, on every wall in every classroom, was a white male, which kind of negates an entire history of people. Nothing about mathematicians in India, no women. So like display audits are really great. And then policy audits, just looking at how many policies do we have in schools that have to do with uniform, that are extremely, extremely hurtful to girls and women, that negate things like students who have afros in their hair. Like it's really, really strange to see that there are such old-fashioned and anachronistic policies that we still have in schools today. Same with behavior management policies when we look at data on exclusions, which can be particularly telling. And then things like extracurriculars, like are there gay straight alliances in schools? So all of these things can kind of be introduced to make a really, really big difference. But again, it's kind of looking at it as an institution and how we can change the institution, not how we can kind of do standalone things.
Brilliant, thank you. And then that goes to lots of things, actually, isn't it? About having joined up approaches to make sure it's just part of the life and soul and breath of everything that you do within your organisation, isn't it? Nick, can you give me your sort of thoughts on that, please, as well?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I agree with a lot of what has been said already. And I would also say that I'm not saying that you should never have events or celebrations, because actually they can be incredibly powerful. And I think things that are small little tweaks can actually have a huge impact to students. I suppose I can probably speak a little bit more from an LGBTQ plus point of view, but I know that students really appreciate it when staff do things like wear rainbow lanyards or wear supportive badges, and they are the kinds of things that are small little tweaks that you can make that can have a huge difference. But I think what I'm saying is that's not enough by itself, and I think it's important that it's part of the picture, but there's a lot more that needs to go into it. So are we reviewing and thinking really meaningfully about the curriculum, and thinking about how far every single student that is in the school is represented as part of the curriculum? And also, even if it is a school that doesn't have as much diversity, though I would say, you're going to find diversity in some way, shape or form, because you've got a lot of different young people in front of you. But you don't necessarily think that just because your school doesn't have a wide range of different students from different backgrounds, or you might say that you don't know about the makeup of your school or whatever that topic might be, you still need to make sure that diversity is represented effectively, because you're preparing young people to go into a diverse world, so they need to have that experience there. So I would always say the curriculum is an incredibly important place to start, and making sure that you're reviewing that and making sure it's effective. Looking at the policies, are they inclusive? We spoke about gender and uniform policies. Are you making sure that it's inclusive for trans and non-binary people that you might have within your schools? And then consulting staff and making sure that staff are aware and supportive and on board, constantly reviewing the policies that are within your school, and involving the staff and the students within those conversations, because people need to have a say in it and they need to have buy-in to make sure that they're aware of what's happening and that they are able to contribute effectively. And then absolutely making sure that every single element of the school life, reviewing it and looking at it to make sure it is as effective as it can be. Not only are you saying that we have an assembly, for example, do you have an assembly that covers LGBT History Month? But does every single assembly that you have, is that because it doesn't have to be a specific assembly that targets a particular issue, but actually are all of the assemblies, are they inclusive of people of colour? Are they inclusive of disabled people? Are they inclusive of women? And actually every single assembly should be inclusive. It isn't good enough to just have one assembly, tick box, move on, but you need to make sure they all do it. That's incredibly important.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree with what you're sharing there, and it goes in many ways. So we had an episode last week where we looked at literacy, and we were saying, well, we're all teachers of English because we all work in the medium of English. It's all of our responsibility to ensure that we're checking for literacy and grammar and SPAG and all the rest of it, regardless of whether you're a geography, history, French, whatever teacher. It's equally true then, based on what you're saying there, Nick, that we're all teachers who should be making sure that inclusion and diversity is celebrated and thought about as part of everything that we do within the fabric of our school. Is that right?
Absolutely. I think it's incredibly important that we do that and are mindful of what's happening, because I think the danger would be that if you do think, okay, well, I've done my one lesson that deals with this issue, that you can then move on and completely forget about it. I mean, terrible. You can't have that. It needs to be consistent.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Nick. And over to you, Alana.
I think I'll have to agree with Nick there. So there's nothing wrong with starting from a tokenistic point of view. So I always say if there's nothing currently in existence in your school, it's absolutely fine to start with Black History Month. If the next year you're still doing Black History Month and nothing's been embedded into your curriculum, then that's when there's an issue, because it means that you're doing the tokenistic and the light celebratory rather than doing the substantive work that needs to be done in order to change culture. And the second part for me would be, well, in terms of language, would be not allowing language to be the point that brings you to inactivity. So there are lots of people, and especially when you're talking about race, there's lots of language that is used around race that will just make people inactive because they revert to the personal rather than looking at the institution or looking at the structures or looking at the change that needs to be made. So even for light issues, and I say light issues by comparison to the much wider issues that there are around in race. So if we talk about hair and hair policy, if I were to say that the hair policy is discriminatory against Black students within the school, then a school is more likely to go, we wouldn't do that, we're not racist. And that detracts from actually looking at the policy, because the school is focused on the judgment being made about themselves. And that happens a lot. There are lots of terms within race relations that can trigger a reaction. And we know that because we see it coming from our government and we see it coming from other parts, where lack of understanding of the terminology leads to the terminology being misused, and therefore leads to a lot of friction, where people are pay more regard to their personal response to language than they do to the actual issue at hand that needs to be changed. So I'd say to schools, and I'd say to staff, and I'd say to parents and everyone else, think of the language you're going to use and make sure that it's explanatory so that people understand the sentiment that you're expressing, the change that you desire to happen, rather than focus on the word you used, because there are many ways to express things. And if you really want to be effective, you have to express things in ways that will bring, from a race perspective, bring my white colleagues along so that they are more interested in the conversation we're having about race and willing to change structures.
Brilliant. That's really interesting. Thank you very much, Alana. We've had some comments from our audience. We've got Toria coming through and saying representation is so important. So we've got Sarah Hazel sharing, and welcome again to the show, Sarah. Thank you for your support. It's really integrating diversity that's key, and not just token gestures, which sort of reinforces the comments from our guest this evening. We've also got an interesting comment from Amy Flores, showing she's an ESOL teacher and comes from another country. It does make a difference to have someone else on board, to have the sense of being accompanied and supported, and to have the right to actually have a voice. Thank you for joining us and for your comments there, Amy. Really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for your responses to that question, everybody. Bookie, over to you.
Okay, so this is a bit of a mouthful, so I'm going to say this one. So, challenge fatigue is a term coined to represent the tiredness some educators experience as they address discussions around diversity. How can we work around the challenge fatigue that stems from constantly addressing diversity issues? And I will start with Morgan, if I may, and Alana. Put you right into it, and then no, we're really asking some challenging questions.
No, it's good. Challenge fatigue. So challenge fatigue, when it comes to feeling, I think challenge fatigue is usually put on the shoulders of people who are women and minorities who constantly have to point out the obvious in the room. And when they constantly have to do it over and over and over again, it is exhausting and it feels like an uphill battle. And what you need to do to change it is usually to start making sure that we change the leadership structures in our school. If we're going to change challenge fatigue, you need to make sure that you are not making the same arguments over and over again to the people at the top, but instead the people at the top see And it's really, really great if we can start having more diversity at the top of schools. And that's not something that we are necessarily seeing, not just in the UAE, not just in the UK or in Canada or in the US. It's pretty consistent that we're missing voices at the top that have a true understanding of diversity, because our voices at the top just simply aren't as diverse. So I think that if you really want to stop challenge fatigue, one of the things that you really have to do is you have to place more diverse voices in places of power, and empower them all the way up to the top. Make sure that they're empowered as middle managers and then as senior managers before they can become head teachers.
Okay, thank you, Morgan. And again, so sorry, Morgan, again for putting you on the spot, but just for clarity, so when you say more diversity terms in leadership, are you just referring to diversity of thought, or diversity terms of representation from the protected characteristics? Could you just explain a little bit about that, please, before I move on?
I think that we need more diversity in the sense that, like, most head teachers in the UK are going to be white males. So I think that very thing right there, I think that says a lot about our education systems. And I think that most of us in our schools, we are not going to see the same diversity that we have in our classrooms mirrored in the diversity that we see in our leadership structures. And I think that there's something to that right there. I know that we want to go beyond like this idea of representation and inclusion. I think inclusion is going to happen more easily when we have diverse voices at the top. And I think that we've really got to start pushing more. And I think we just have to recognize that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you again. I know I put you on the spot with that, but thank you so much. Alana.
I agree with everything Morgan has said. And I would include in there the step that comes before that is making conversations that build allyship. There is no point expending energy on someone whose mind is set in concrete and it's not going to change. It is better to target the person that you're going to speak to, the person that has an open mind, the person that you can rationalize with, so that you can have those conversations and change minds. Because the more allies and allyship that occurs, then there's more people who can have that conversation. Because the most important conversation is the conversation that happens when you are centered in the room. It's the one that takes place in spaces where you aren't present. And until you can get access to those spaces, it is up to allies and allyship to be the ones to explain those ideas really well. So if you're going to spend time having that conversation about the protected characteristics and what needs to change and how do we change discrimination across the piece and how do we get more people into leadership and more diverse boards, it has to be that we start off with which are the allies that we can really target and zone in who are going to send and spread that message really well. In BayMed, we talk about getting the critical mass. So when you get the critical mass, change happens. And we see that with Marcus Rashford. He got a critical mass of people to come out and support children during the half term. And therefore, we can see the cogs are turning and change will happen in the future. And it's the same for all of us. We need to get far more allies and spend the energy there so that you're able to get that critical mass of people who will want change to happen and will cause change to happen.
Thank you. I love the phrase you said, where the most important conversations happen where you're not present. And I just think that's really key because a lot of people cannot even get access to that. So having your allies who can speak on your behalf is a very powerful endeavor in that regard. So thank you, Alana. And over to you, Nick. What are your thoughts with regards to this rather challenging question?
I mean, you're asking a lot of challenging questions, which is good. I know we have to go there. We really, really do. And I completely agree with what I've heard. I think especially some of Alana's points about allyship. And I think that actually often allies are going to be in a more powerful position because they're not advocating on behalf of themselves. So I think those people who would claim or would say that they are allies, I think they should make sure that they're listening. And of course, I think that, you know, obviously as a white man, that's my role to make sure that I'm listening and advocating, not by speaking over different groups of people, but making sure that I'm actually listening into the conversations first. I think that's incredibly important. I did think, though, when I was hearing about this phrase of challenge fatigue, which I hadn't heard of before, that it's quite a privileged thing to be able to do, isn't it? To say that you're fed up of talking about diversity and it's not something that you want to talk about. And actually, I think it is the responsibility of every single person to still engage meaningfully within this. It is your job. Like I was saying before, it is our job to support every single person in a school. And to say that you're not going to do that because you're tired of hearing about it, I don't think that's actually acceptable. I think it's something that is incumbent upon every single one of us to engage within that. So I think, yes, absolutely, we think about buy-in, we think about support, and it is incredibly important that we do that. But also I think that there comes to be a position where we just have to say, no, this is a really important topic. It is at the heart of everything that we do, and we are going to do it.
Love the last point you ended on there, Nick, with the fact that, yeah, it's a privilege to be able to turn and say, I'm actually fed up of talking about this, and stressing the point about the fact that making a key decision about moving forward particular things and actually turning that into action. So thank you all very much for your thoughts. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Bookie. The next question sort of leads on from some of the comments you've made previously, actually, all of you. Before I get into the question, I'm mindful of the time, so I'm not going to ask everybody this question, so we can get through some more questions, if that's okay. I'm just going to come to you, Nick, and just say, come out with the question. How do you keep on top of all of the different phrases and terminologies around diversity and inclusion? I get a similar sort of thing, not to say that EdTech is the same as diversity and inclusion, but teachers come to me all the time and say, how do you keep on top of all the new apps and all the new things that are coming out? Well, not that diversity and inclusion are that at all, but how do you stay on top of all of these different things that are happening? Because surely it must be difficult for some people to sort of have that and be on top of all these different things. Have you got any advice for people?
Listen, to begin with, I think is the most important thing, and I think that it's something that no one is going to be on top of every single piece of terminology or every single piece of language. It can be a challenge, but listen as much as you can, widen your circles, listen to different groups of people, and if you get terminology wrong, because that can sometimes happen because people make mistakes, don't just pretend you haven't done it. Acknowledge the mistake and learn from it, and try and do it differently in the future. I think that if we broaden our circles and make sure that we are genuinely actively making sure that we are going out there and finding the information from the charities, from the organisations, then we can deepen our vocabulary and make sure we're aware of more of these topics. Obviously, I'm speaking from the point of view of being able to address as a gay man, but as a white male as well, I need to make sure that I am doing the work to try and find out more about those pieces of terminology that I need to do. If you make a mistake though, I would say don't make a big deal about it and say, oh, I'm terrible, I'm awful, because that's actually not doing any good to do that. Just apologise, fix it, and do it better next time is what I would say.
Thank you, Nick. I think that's great advice, and I think we can apply that to lots of things, can't we? I think it's okay to not know, but what a lot of people often find difficult is actually coming out and saying, I don't know, but I'll go off and find out, or I'll seek some help, and I'll come. But it is the right thing, isn't it, to just fess up, I guess, and just say, I don't know, I'm really sorry, and then work forwards from that. Thank you so much for your response there, Nick. Thank you. That's really kind of you. Bookie, do you want to jump on to the next question, Bookie?
Yes. So my next question is, and I'm going to pose this to Morgan, what could be done to address Pupil Voice with regards to diversity and inclusion?
So for Pupil Voice, I think that students in every single opportunity should be given platforms inside and outside the classroom. So when we take a look inside the classroom, there's lots of ways for students to kind of put their own stories and their own voices at the forefront. So when I think about how there are certain subjects that really lend themselves to this, it's easier to do that, I think, in English and in history and geography, perhaps for their own stories, to kind of come to the forefront where you can talk about differences and celebrate them more. I think it's harder to find those opportunities in the curriculum in other subjects, but it's definitely possible. And then outside the classroom, in terms of Pupil Voice, you want to make sure that you have student-led initiatives that are given every single opportunity to thrive because it is an inclusive environment. One of the things that I really, really liked that Nick mentioned was the fact that if you have teachers that are wearing a rainbow flag, for instance, creating a safe space, then you create an opportunity when you have, let's say, school clubs or gay straight alliances, things like that. They really open up. Students to take leadership roles when it comes to their own voice, and that can be extremely empowering. So I think that teachers can create the spaces, the schools can create the time and kind of give signals that this is a safe space for students to kind of have their voices out there. And then the students can then really become drivers. It's really, really great when you have students do things like policy audits and then feed back to the schools. Having feedback mechanisms, both, again, within the curriculum, within the classroom, and then outside the curriculum and extracurricular spaces. That's really, really powerful. So I think Pupil Voice can kind of come in those two main vehicles.
Thank you so much. That's a really detailed response. And I love the fact that you've mentioned about, what could happen inside the classroom as well as beyond, and also giving opportunities to students to have ownership and take a lead on things as well, because I know that some very powerful things can actually happen when students are given the opportunity to lead in that regard as well. Thank you. Over to you, Mark.
Brilliant, thank you. And then, so for the final single question, a question to a single person, Alana, I'm going to jump over to you if that's okay. Could you give some sort of response to your experience of students within your school in regards to diversity, please?
Students in my school?
Yeah. So what's the experience of students
how they
in your
respond
schools to with regard to diversity?
Right. I think, well, my school is one of those that breaks that sort of mold and stereotype of independent schools in that it reflects the diversity of North London. And North London is an incredibly diverse area. And I think diversity brings diversity. So students within our school, I insist that they get a broad range of perspectives, so that when we're learning about any topic, they're able to discuss that from perspectives. So if they're talking about Florence Nightingale, you're talking about Mary Seacole, and we're comparing how those two were perceived. If we're talking about astronauts, if we're talking about art, no matter what we're talking about, we put it from various perspectives so that they always get a broad range that they are then able to rationalize their way through, and teaching them how to think. So I think broadening the experiences that they have, and not just the experiences, but the learning that goes behind it, is probably really fundamental. On the other hand, in policy-wise, I can say that students within my school are very aware that any incidences of discrimination, prejudice, racism, etc., are treated incredibly swiftly and incredibly strictly within our school. So we maintain respect for each other, and that's something that they learn. So even though, and they are children, they are 3 to 11, so they make mistakes, and they will make comments that they've heard somewhere and it's really hurtful to others. And we take the time to discuss it and talk them through so that they understand why those comments are very hurtful to each other. So a really simple one is, I think a student called another one gay. And then when they were spoken to by their teacher, they said, "Please don't go and tell Miss Gay. She'll be so disappointed in me." And I thought, well, that's really cute. That you're more upset that I'll be disappointed than your parents. But it also sort of reinforced that idea that they knew within the back of their minds that what they were saying was wrong, but they still said it. So we had to reason through and have that whole conversation about why it's still said and why it's unacceptable. And I think people underestimate how much children from a very young age are able to understand and rationalize and change their patterns of behavior. So this whole, that it's just really tiny children, you can't expose them to that. Those children, their pattern of understanding is so much better than some of our adults. So much better than some of our adults, that I think they aren't given enough credit for how well they're able to respond in different situations.
Brilliant, thank you for that response there, Alana. Bookie, over to you.
Okay, so this is a question for all three of you. From your own personal context or things that you've actually heard anecdotally, what examples of best practice can you share with regards to diversity within a school context? Oh, and I will start, well, if anyone wants to start, I was going to say, I'll start with Nick, actually. Nick, then Alana, and then Morgan.
Thank you. In terms, I'll take that question in its two parts. So, firstly, my own experience, and then I suppose kind of broader. Beyond that, I consider myself to be really, really lucky because as a member of staff, I feel very much supported in terms of being openly gay in school. I am able to run with some of my colleagues a student group, and we are able to really make sure that we do the work to make sure that students feel supported within our own context. And I think that what's the kinds of factors that are supportive with that are a senior leadership team who are very much supportive. The fact that we can connect and draw upon amazing outside resources as well, and make use of the charities and external partners and organisations that have really high quality practice on this. And I think that's really important that is done, because there is actually amazing work out there. It's pooling that and using that within the school contexts, because it is so fantastic. And that's what I would like to draw upon for the second part of the question, which is those kind of outside of my own experiences, what I've heard that is really good. There are so many charities in the field of supporting LGBTQ plus young people within education. Stonewall does fantastic work. There's a charity Just Like Us, which does brilliant work in terms of setting up student groups and supporting student leadership, and they do School Diversity Week, but they make sure that the work done in school is also embedded throughout the academic year, which I think is incredibly important. There's Diversity Role Models, which brings in LGBTQ plus role models into school, so that they can do workshops where they speak to young people. The Proud Trust have incredible resources. There's Educate and Celebrate as well, and then Schools Out, which do great work with LGBT History Month. And I think that because all of those amazing organizations are out there, it's about using that and making the most of those organizations within school context, so that the great work and the great practice that is there is able to be shared by everyone and accessed by everyone.
Thank you. And thanks for also mentioning names of organisations that schools could actually tap in with. In my school context, we had an organisation whose name I've forgotten, which is so terrible, but they were really good in helping us understand, the different terminologies with regards to the LGBTQIA, I would say, agenda. But creating a safe space for us to ask questions, not feel embarrassed, and then think about from a curricular context as well as a policy context, the things that we need to put in place. So not only did they do that in terms of the training, but they allowed us to, they visited us a month later, and they kept coming back just to check things. So I thought it was really good. And
that's great that they come back. I think that's so helpful that you can revisit it and see what's done later on.
Oh yeah. So if I remember what their name is, I'll share it. But yeah, very, very well, led and very supportive. So
I love the fact they came back as well, because we talked earlier, didn't we, about how things can be tokenistic. Well, clearly, by allowing them to come back and revisit, that's just a great way of embedding that, Bookie, isn't it? And ensuring that these aren't tokenistic things. Sorry, I interrupted. It's your go, Alana.
No, that's okay. Yeah. All right. So
absolutely fine. I think it's different. I think I'd be hard pressed to find a school that's got it right yet. But I do think that there are lots of schools who have started the journey and who are committing to the journey. So I think since the BLM movement within the summer and the occurrence of George Floyd and the way that it was very much in your face, there are lots of schools who are now seriously considering the journey that their students will be on and considering what they can do in order to bring racial equality within education and within our society. And I think there's a lot of credit to give to those schools that are seriously engaging in that as a large part of their community. So I can think of Church of England schools where they are looking at how do I talk about and get racial equality to be a part of the curriculum or a part of everyday experience. not only within predominantly diverse schools that they have in London and Birmingham, etc., but within the rural schools that they have, where there are students who might never have encountered a Black person in their entire lives. And I think the thought process that's going in there is what gives me hope that lots of change is going to happen, and we'll soon have schools that are doing so incredibly well with this. There's lots of resources and there's lots of places for people to start. And I think lots of schools have started in different places. So there's a huge movement that's looking at curriculum and how the curriculum can be developed. And that's advocated by things like Black curriculum or the varied perspectives, the Runnymede Trust and their migration story, etc. But then there are others who are looking specifically at recruitment and changing the manner in which recruitment occurs so that they're able to recruit more diversely and retain the diverse staff that they have. So creating a change of culture that's going to happen. So for race equality, I'd say it's a lot slower. There hasn't been the impetus from above that we would have liked. And there hasn't been the importance and significance put there. But what really gives me heart is the fact that schools have taken it upon themselves and said, in the absence of leadership in this sphere, we will make our own moves and we will make our own progress. And that's going to lead really well for us in the future.
Thank you, Alana.
Thank you, Alana. Thank you. And Morgan.
Yeah, I think to talk about best practice and diversity, I think that since Black Lives Matter has really kind of ignited this kind of fire beneath all of us, I think that since the spring, I have seen more online, more teachers sharing resources. There are so many lesson plans, so many jump starts that you can get that it's really easy to find when you're looking for. The New York Times has this amazing 1619 project, which is incredible, which is great for history. I know that in our own schools, my school, for instance, the entire history staff, they got together and completely reworked the first term of this year for all of seniors, for their entire senior school, to focus on racial equality, and it's just been amazing. It's been incredible. In terms of a really great initiative you can start at schools, I would recommend Global Social Leaders. So Global Social Leaders is a student-run group, and what the idea behind it is the UN Sustainable Development Goals, so the 17 goals. Students themselves have to come up with projects that they can institute in the school and in the community, and so many of them have to do with different types of equality and how to basically make the world a better place. And the onus is really on them to kind of show how they can make impacts, both small and large. And that's a really, really great way to kind of bring in so many different subjects. It's cross-curricular. It really puts students at the forefront. It puts diversity at the forefront. So that's a really great student-run initiative that if you can bring to your school, the resources are all there and it's fantastic. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think as a whole, it'd be really lovely to see exam boards take more of a lead in kind of decolonizing the curriculum, querying up the curriculum. That would be great. So I think that we have to wait for, we have to push, not wait. We have to push for those larger changes, and then do whatever we can within our schools to make sure that they see at the very, very top that there is a moral imperative for change.
Very interesting. You mentioned about exam boards. Very interesting in that regard, because I think that, interestingly, if we had certain reflections of diversity within that might actually be a driver for schools to catch up with some of the things that they need to do from a curriculum perspective. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you very much. And definitely on a national curriculum front as well, being supported by governments for ADEC for your side and the DFE for us over here. I think it's a great thought to try and because we're all in this together, aren't we? After all, it's not about us or them. It's about us all working together to ensure that we do the right thing here. Bookie, we're almost out of time.
Yes, we are.
So do you want to do the last question quickly, and then I'll do the comments?
Okay, so just really quickly, are there any resources? So, for example, if you've got educators or school leaders who should look out for particular resources, or links or sites or organizations, just to help them make a start on the diversity agenda and policies they're trying to put in place, who would be your go-tos? Like one or two organizations or resources you say that actually you should consider. Okay, so I'll start with Alana, and then Nick, and then Morgan.
I would say to go to any of the grassroots organizations. So for example, in BayMed, we've just revamped our website and put on a whole load of resources and links. And I know Diverse Ed has done the same, LGBT Ed, Disability Ed, we've all done the same. So we've loaded all of those resources so that there is a collection that's available that people can come and select what they need and get a starting point to take them on that journey to find resources that they need. And as well, it's always great to have a network.
Yeah.
I'll have to plug Edu Twitter for this because it has its bad side, but it has its really positive side in terms of the sharing of resources and being able to network and link with others and ask questions.
Thank you so much, Nick.
Thank you. I obviously mentioned some of the charities and organisations earlier on, so I would definitely point people in their direction. But thank you also, Alana, for plugging LGBT Ed and the other Diverse Ed grassroots organisations, because I think they are absolutely fantastic and really, really impressive. With LGBT Ed, we do have a website, and we've got a book coming up towards the end of the year, which shares individuals' stories. So check out the Twitter page for that. There is also a Masters in Leadership too. If people are interested in finding out more information via that, I would say follow the website. But yeah, on Twitter, I completely agree. That's such a good resource for sharing, accessing information. It's just, I was so shocked and so impressed when I first joined Twitter that there was so much out there, and I would say use it and make the most of the resources that are there, because they're absolutely brilliant.
Thank you so much, Nick. And am I right in thinking that is there a weekly chat that LGBT Ed, sorry, stumbling over words, LGBT Ed actually run? Is that correct?
Yes, I'm being far too bashful and not mentioning it because it is, I run that chat. But yeah, they are weekly during term times on Thursday evenings from 7 p.m. If you use the hashtag LGBTEd chat, then you can get involved in those discussions. I'm pleased you plugged that for me, Bucky, rather than me doing it myself. I'm very grateful for that. But yeah, do get involved. That would be lovely to see as many people do that as possible.
All right, thank you, Nick. And last but not least, Morgan.
I'm just going to end with a confession. I was not on Twitter until about 3 hours ago. So for the first time 3 hours ago, because Mark told me, he's like, why aren't you in Twitter? I'm just like, oh, I don't know. I'm intimidated by it. I'm a Luddite. Anyways, as soon as I went on, literally within a half hour, I was amazed at the resources that were at my fingertips. And I feel like, I feel so ridiculously silly for not joining sooner. So yeah, I'll just leave that with a recommendation. If you are someone like me who is a late adapter, this is the time to definitely join and just avail yourself to the thousands, millions of different resources that are available.
Okay, thank you so much. Well done, Mark, for actually prompting Morgan to actually join Twitter.
I couldn't believe it when we were sort of talking post Learn Live UE conference that you weren't on. I'm so pleased to see you finally joined. Well done. It is a fantastic place for resources. Bucky and I would never have met all those years ago.
Okay.
We wouldn't be doing what we're doing now if it wasn't for connecting and working together through the platform. It is a fantastic place. And Anna, you mentioned some of the negative things that can happen there. You get, just like you get mood hoovers in every staff room, you get mood hoovers on Twitter as well, for sure. But we know how to avoid them, and so Morgan, just the block and mute buttons are there for a reason. So please, should you need to. We're at the end of the show for the week. I want to sort of wrap up by bringing in a few comments and saying thank you. Sarah has jumped in and reinforced the comments about Twitter being such a great and rich resource. Thank you to all of our commenters across the course of the evening, from Sarah to Amy to Toria. We've got one viewer this evening, Nikki Bright, who's a regular viewer to the show as well, but she's been commenting on Twitter, and she brought in a nice comment as well, actually, about and she was at a Diverse Ed masterclass session today for governors with Hannah and Benny Cara. And she makes the important point as well that trustees and governors, depending on your sort of school oversight sort of setup wherever you are and what your setting is, but governors are really important, a really key important part of helping set the agenda too. She says asking supportive challenge questions about what is happening in the school is so important, and I definitely agree with that, both from sort of governor work I've done outside of being in the school and also in the role of being a staff governor as well. It's so important to try and steer and have those critical friend, I guess, moments with the leadership team to provide checks and balances for them as well. But the advice shared tonight from, and I'm going to try something technical here, the advice shared tonight here from Morgan and from Nick and from Alana has been absolutely superb this evening. So thank you so much to the three of you for taking the time to come and join us on the show this evening. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
We're going to shoot off in just a note about next week's episode. Next week's episode is focusing on what does blended learning mean to you and how are you doing it? There are so many different terminologies for hybrid, remote, synchronous, asynchronous. I mean, we've got a whole new vernacular this past calendar year for teaching and learning. And so we're going to be focusing on that with some guests next week who've got a lot of experience in this area. Please follow myself and Bookie on Twitter to find out more about next week's episode. But it will be on YouTube and Periscope, same time, same place, 7 till 8 p.m. But for now, and myself and Bookie and everybody here this evening, thank you so much for joining us. It's time to say goodbye.
Yeah, take care, everyone.
Take care. Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.